All right, so here we are at our final day together, and welcome to you and welcome to all of you that are downloading. And let me set up today's chart. It seems to have been a theme for us in this particular clinic, and we are in our third week. Obviously, there's been a lot of projectors, and it's always interesting to realize how important it is for projectors to be able to study and to be able to get the information they need in order to be able to master their process. By the way, if you hear a buzzing sound in the background, nothing I can do about that. There's some work going on in my building. So here we are with this particular design, and you can see that in your design, what we're looking at is a single definition. That is this definition that is running from the throat center and going down to the splenic system. It's one of the things to keep in mind about what it is to have a simple single definition, that is only two centers connected to each other. There's an enormous amount of vulnerability. We saw that vulnerability yesterday in looking at a simple definition and in a projector and 7 centers that are open. And whenever you're dealing with so many centers that are open, and at the same time you're dealing with somebody that has a defined splenic system, then you know that the protection of their aura is one of the most important things in their lives. And for you, this is one of the most important things that you have to understand. You were given a very powerful defense system in order to be able to defend yourself, in order to be able to protect yourself, and in order to be able to protect your aura. It is something that we don't often think about in terms of the projector, because I think that a lot of negative is applied to the projector in the way in which their aura operates. That is, this focused and penetrating aura. And most of the concentration in understanding projectors is geared to that. That is just seeing this, the way in which the way in which your particular aura can penetrate into the other. But what isn't really understood is how vulnerable that leaves the projector. It's not like being a manifester or being a reflector, the manifester with the repelling aura, the reflector with their Teflon aura. It's not about the generator that's designed to take in the auras of others with their enveloping aura. The projector is very focused. Their aura is very focused on the other, which means that those areas of vulnerability in their design become even more vulnerable in that sense because there is no protection. I mean, in a sense, all projectors enter into relationships, enter into any connection with the other, in a sense, very naked, very open to conditioning. Now, obviously, it's part of your design in that sense to take in the necessary conditioning. All projectors have to deal with that. The potential to manifest, the potential to generate is something that becomes essentially important. And of course, you can see in your design that the real themes for you, the main themes for you, is themes that give you manifesting energy. That is the 58th gate, the other end of the 18th gate, the 28th gate, the other end of the 38th gate, bringing what is a very active root system of yours into connection with your spleen, and of course driving all of this energy up to the throat. I mean, there is the 34th gate, that is obviously a gate that is open to the generative connection. But the real theme lies mostly in the 58 and the 38 because of the logic and individuality that is there in your particular design. It says something so important about the nature of, how aware projectors have to be in taking in the energy of the other. They literally have to be more aware of that than any other type. It is the thing that makes a difference in their life. If you take the wrong fuel into your system, then the system isn't going to work correctly. If you take the wrong forces into your life isn't going to work correctly. And it's not just an easy thing of just pushing somebody away and thinking that you're done with it. The fact is that projectors, because of the vulnerability of their design, when they do take energy into their system, it is really an effort to clean that out. You notice in my discussions in regards to all of the designs of the projectors that I've looked at, how important it is not to be exhausted, how important it is to sleep in your own aura, how important it is to give yourself an opportunity to be able to clean out what you collect during the course of the day in terms of the energies that you take into your system. But most of all, it comes to discernment. I mean, discernment is really the major theme that is there in design. no conditioning is more powerful than the conditioning that you take in from the other. And here in your definition, the only definition you have is collective. In other words, you really are designed to share with the other. And it means that sharing is something that, you have to be so careful about in terms of discerning who are the correct forces, that have the privilege in that sense of being able to integrate into your system. The other thing is that all single definitions are, have to deal with the power of the not-self as it, operates through open centers. And obviously, you have 7 open centers, and each and every one of them are aspects of your not-self mind. And it begins with the open G. That is, it begins with a real grasp of how essential it is for you to be in the right place. As a matter of fact, when you look at your open G and you see that the only gate that's there is the 7th gate, the only way that you really find your role is when you're in the right place. This is where you really get to fulfill the potential that is inherent, in your particular cross. And of course, the cross itself is so interesting because it's one of those names that, when people look at it, they don't quite know what to make of it. You came in on the left angle cross of upheaval. And, you're really here to turn around the lives of those that you connect to. Again, as a projector, your role in this life, that is the role that's inherent in being a projector, is that you're here to provide guidance. And obviously having the channel 1648, which is the channel of talent, it means that there is an inherent talent in you to be able to provide that guidance to others. Yet at the same time, you have to be very careful about that. One of the most important things for you to appreciate is how special it is for you to be one-on-one with the other human being. And this is something that goes to the very core of what it is to be a projector. But it's even more so in terms of your design. If you take a look at your throat center, your throat center is indicative of your power to be able to communicate. And there's these 4 gates that are operating out of the throat center. Only one that's conscious, obviously, the 16th gate. But if I were to simplify this into keynote language, basically, you have to, the 45, with skills, the 16, make your contribution, the 8, by explaining things. I mean, this fundamentally is who you are. To skillfully, because this is what you have to do, to skillfully make your contribution by explaining things. But in explaining things, it doesn't mean that you have to be permanently connected to the other, nor does it mean that you have to be subservient to any kind of group configuration. So very often collective beings with collective definition, get caught up in group situations, where they feel like, they're able to share, and yet at the same time, they may not really be what is correct for them. I mean, after all, the real group circuitry in design is tribal. I mean, it's tribal. The collective is mostly about sharing with the other. And in looking at these gates in the throat, particularly in looking at the 8 and the 23, the 8th gate that you have is the design Venus, and obviously has a great deal to do with your relationship, your values, your mores in relationship to the other. Now again, this is one of those lines that can be misunderstood, because of its heading, the phony. It's about the acceptance of style and not the substance of communal action. In other words, there's ability inherent in you to be able to deal with the communal environment, but it's not really the thing for you. Yes, you have that perfected and rarely detected superficial intimacy. In other words, you really have a gift in that sense of, making the other and making in that group situation, the communal situation, that sense that you're really there and you're really committed to the process and whatever the case may be. But it's not what is natural for you. And again, whenever you're in those kinds of situations, whenever you're in those communal situations, that it's much more important for you to pull people aside In other words, rather than get drawn into whatever the communal process happens to be, it's much more important for you, given that you're a projector, given that projectors work best one-on-one, take advantage of the style that you can bring, yet bring the substance to the actual connection that you can make with those individuals. The other thing is the 23rd gate, because the 23rd gate speaks so strongly about the nature of how powerful your immune system is and what it's there for you. This is a line of self-defense, and it's the need to abandon tolerance when survival is threatened. The principle of preservation at its most acute, which is really a classic description of this kind of configuration, what is necessary for you. In other words, you're not here to be conditioned. As a matter of fact, conditioning for you is an enormous threat to your talent. And again, it speaks so much about the nature of your splenic system. You can see so clearly that, your spleen is something that is very, very active. There is a lot of double activations that are there. It's strongly activated. And obviously the splenic system is something that creates dilemmas. Whenever you meet somebody who has a very strong spleen, they have a potential of making other people feel good. That is the nature of the splenic system. It is the feel good, the laundry, whatever. When you think about all the people that have undefined spleens, they spend their lives looking for a defined spleen. They're desperate for that sense of security and comfort and protection and all of those things that come from it. It's why the not-self strategy of the open spleen is holding on to things. They hold on to that spleen because this is something that is their security blanket. And of course, when you look at what it's like for you as a projector, you have to see that you end up with beings in your life that end up getting attracted to you and end up desperately needing to hold on to that spleen of yours. And of course, all of that leads to dilemmas. That is, it leads to dilemmas, as it does for every projector, when you end up with forces in your life that are just simply not correct for you. It goes back to the basics. It always goes back to the basics. It's the most beautiful thing about human design is that fundamentally it's simple. Mechanics are fundamentally simple. It is about protecting yourself. And it's about understanding something about the nature of the spontaneity that rules your life. I talk often and have talked often in this clinic about, the nature of surrender, what it really means to surrender. And in your particular case, the quality of surrender is really something that is, in essence, very profound. You're here to surrender to the now. To the now. You actually have no other way of working. It is ironic in a sense because you have a logical definition. And the logical definition, everything having to do with logical circuitry has to do with patterns and the way patterns get projected into the future. And yet at the same time, because you're so deeply splenic, think about the way the spleen works. Somebody comes up to you and they invite you, whatever, out to lunch or to do something or whatever the case may be. In that moment, and only in that moment, is what your spleen will deal with. It isn't going to deal with the future of that relationship. It isn't going to look at what may happen down the road. It's only going to react in that moment to what's there in the moment. And in the moment, it may say no. And in saying no, there's nothing to be derived from that or extrapolated out of that. For example, somebody, invites you to go out to lunch and, you hear yourself say no. It's immediate. It goes racing up to the throat. You hear yourself in the moment say no. Now, it doesn't mean that those are people that you always say no to. It doesn't mean that at all. As a matter of fact, that very same person can ask you an hour later, and the answer could very easily be yes. Oh, what it is to be splenic. I've been dealing with this now for the 23 years that I've been aware of my design. I'm a splenic being. I have splenic authority. And it's fascinating about the spleen. And one of the most fascinating things about the spleen is that it cannot be understood by the mind. You know, to be splenic in a way is an opportunity to really be able to more easily, in a sense, bypass the power of the mind if one trusts it. Because the mind can't help you. There's no way that the mind can actually understand why the spleen says yes or no at any given moment. It cannot. As a matter of fact, most beings who are splenic, who are unaware of their nature, they're constantly making things up in their mind. You know, that no comes out and their mind is saying, we're saying no because. We're saying no because of this, we're saying no because of that, and you know, they make up all of this stuff about why they're saying no. And none of it is even close to the truth, because the spleen doesn't operate conceptually. You know, it's not dealing with the world in the same way. In essence, what it's really saying is, when it says no, it's saying in the moment, this is unhealthy. That's all it's saying. It isn't saying anything else. It's saying, in the moment, this is unhealthy. And it's not saying what it's unhealthy for. You know, it's not saying that, you know, where you're going to go to lunch, there's going to be somebody sitting beside you that has a flu. Or, you know, it's not saying that you're going to have an accident, or it's going to be this, or it's going to be that. It doesn't tell you what it is. It can't. It does not conceptualize. And it means that surrender for you is something that's very, very profound, because it's a surrender to immediacy. You know, it's a surrender to temporary truths, because that's what they are. They are temporary truths. Nothing more. Nothing more. Because they can change at any moment. You know, I can absolutely drive people crazy who are in my life, because they'll ask me something, and in the moment I'll say yes. And then 10 minutes later they say, are you ready? And I go, no. And I have no idea why I said yes. And I have no idea why I said no. All I know is that if I don't trust my spleen, I'm going to be one of those people sitting in the hospital that you go and meet, and the first thing they tell you is, I just knew it. You know? You're here to listen to your spleen in the moment, but you're not here to attach anything to that. Now, of course, one of the dilemmas of being a projector is that projectors, as they come into the world, are obviously deeply conditioned. And they're deeply conditioned by the forces around them. You have an undefined heart center, and the undefined heart center, you know, automatically leads to this, you know, I need to prove myself, I'm not really worthy. If somebody asks me to do something, I'm going to do it, because otherwise they're not going to like me, and all of the stuff that goes with that. The same thing is true for the open emotional system. You know, the open emotional system, in its avoidance of confrontation and truth, in that situation where the spleen is ready to say no, there is a conflict that arises with the not-self mind that says, what do you mean no? We can't afford to say no. You know, if we say no, they're going to be angry with us. We're going to have to deal with their energy. They're not going to think that we're nice or worthy, and, you know, all of those things. And you see, this is one of the most difficult things for anybody who enters into this knowledge to grasp. This is about you. It isn't about anybody else. It isn't. You know, if you're going to be loved in this life, you're going to have to be loved for who you are, the way you are. You know, there is no other way. The vast majority of human beings, in the relationships that they have in this life, that those relationships are always based on a competition over who can change the other in a way that they prefer. You know? Oh, if only you would do this, or if only you would be like that, or if only, you know, it's always the same thing. And again, you know, the integrity of what it is to be us, you know, to be unique, to be able to fulfill one's purpose on this plane, that nobody can do that for you. No one. You know, you could be helped in this life. I mean, you have your personality son in the 18.6. You know, it's a sweet-sounding line, Buddhahood, but it's really about being spoiled. It's about having mentors in life. It's about having the potential in your life to have those forces that really help you in that sense, get your footing on this plane. But at the same time, you have to see that whatever you're going to do, you're going to do yourself. You know, there is no other way to do it. And as a projector, you have to see that the only way that that can be fulfilled, and in many ways your advantage by being left angle, is that through discernment you get the correct allies in your process. Now, In going back up here to the profile, the thing about being a 6-2, all 6-line beings go through a tripartite life process. It's really very, very specific. That is, approximately the first 30 years, the Saturn cycle, you live out a personality of third-line themes. Now, for the projector, that can really be a burden. It creates a lot of pessimism in the life. That is, you have 7 third lines in your design. It's very easy for you, based on the first 30 years of your life, to really have a sense that what could be isn't going to be, that the very best isn't possible, and all the things that come out of the inherent pessimism that's possible out of a third line life. And yet, this is not who you are. I mean, you're on the roof stage, and being on the roof stage is when the 6th line being finds their optimism. This is the other side of the pessimism, optimism polarity. It's to find that optimism. It's to begin to see clearly the nature of one's potential. It's also the time to flower materially in the life. I mean, from the Saturn return to the Chiron return, approximately 20 or 21 years, 22 years in the life, this is the time for the 6th line being to establish themselves materially in the world. It's a time for them to distance themselves from the chaos of the first 30 years of their life. And of course, for you, this is something that, goes back to what I've been referring to throughout the week. That is the nature of the call. To be called in this sense to the right struggle, to be called to, the right provocation, to be called to what is, correct for you. Being able to hear the call, this is the one of the most difficult things of all, is to hear the call. Most human beings who carry a 2nd line in their profile, they just don't get it. I mean, they don't. They're so busy in their personality consciousness trying to figure out, what they should do and what they shouldn't do, that they never have a chance to hear the call actually come to them. It's the same thing with the nature of invitation. I mentioned, I think it was yesterday, I mentioned the fact that, there are those that assume that, projectors only get invitations once in a while. But it's not the case. Important invitations, yes, that's true. The invitations to career, love, friendship, all of those major connections in this life. But the fact of the matter is that when the projector is truly in their process, what they get to see is that invitations are everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere. And it's just a matter of waiting for them to formally arise. And in the case of your design, because you're not emotional, because you are so strongly splenic, you don't have to wait when an invitation arrives. You're here to deal with it in the moment and to trust absolutely what your spleen tells you. And of course, in your case, because it's conscious, that is running from the 48 to the 16, it's going to consciously come out. In other words, you're going to hear it expressed. And the dilemma for you is not to get caught in your mind in trying to think of the things that you want to say, or could say, or might say, or should say in any given moment. The key for you is allow your spleen to speak. Because that's what you have. And you have a spleen that is deeply aware. You have very strong instinct in the 44, very strong intuition in the 57. All of that feeds into the 48. All of that feeds into your depth that gets to be expressed with skills in throat. And it's what you say in the moment that matters. It's not what you think later. It's not what you prepared to say. As a matter of fact, that is the worst possible thing you could do, is to get into, preparing, to say things, because this is not what is correct for you. It's about what you say in the moment. It's about living in the moment. It doesn't mean that you can't have, some kind of general view that looks towards, the nature of your life and, where it can go and long-term commitments and all of these kinds of things that are possible. And yet, no matter what the plan seems to be, The plan is never the thing, because the only thing that really exists, is what is correct for you in that moment and what you say in that moment. Regardless who offers you the invitation, if in the moment you hear yourself without interference say yes or no, that's what it's about. It isn't about anything else, and it's not about trying to figure out why. You'll know later. It's that one of those great lines from the Matrix films, which I'm really a fan of. There's this wonderful line where the Oracle says to Neo that it's not about knowing what's going to happen. It's already going to happen. It's about figuring out why it happened afterwards. And this is really the thing about being so splenic and being so existential in that sense. You don't have to figure out why the spleen says yes or no. You will eventually get to see why that yes or no. And that's part of the beauty of discovering yourself and discovering how powerful this spleen is in protecting you. Remember, what you are given is always an indication of what you're going to meet. Each and every one of you, think about that in relationship to your design. What you're given is what you're going to meet. If you're given a very powerful splenic system, you're going to have to protect yourself. This is just going to be a key for you. And it doesn't say anything other than, the way to protect yourself is to trust fully in your spleen guiding you in any given moment. Now, one of the real conditioning elements for you is both in the sacral and in the root. Because of the nature of your root center, where you have all of these activations, that is, you have 5 different gates, got, double activation there in the 42, one of the things about that is that you get over-energized the moment that anybody hooks up your root. And of course, this is something that can be very debilitating in terms of exhausting you. The other side of that open root is always feeling that you're under pressure. That is the pressure to get things done, get them done quickly, and all that kind of stuff. But more important than that, I know children who have open roots with many activations. And I've seen it in one of my children, and a friend would come over when he was young, and, he'd be bouncing off the walls. Because there's this incredible release of pent-up energy that is here. So you have to be careful about those situations where, you suddenly see yourself physically getting out of control. It's always a sign for you, being overactive, just roaring around. You have to be very, very clear. This is conditioning at work. Again, my warning to all projectors, to anybody who has an undefined sacral, how important it is not to get exhausted. The only people that are allowed to be exhausted are generators. They're designed for that. It's the way in which they clean out, their daily potential of energy. But the fact is, for every other type, exhaustion is something that is debilitating. It eventually impacts both the body and the psychology. So be very careful about, flying around on energy. The other thing is what happens when your sacral is activated. The 29th gate is a gate of commitment. And of course, everything about the nature of commitment, is that 29th gate is a gate of saying yes. Generators are always going to pull a yes out of you. That this is what their energy can do for you. And again, it goes back to you having to trust what it is to be you. It's about being deeply aware that it's only through invitation and only when you hear yourself in the moment that anything can be correct for you. Anything. It doesn't matter what it is. And this is something that is so basic and so important for the integrity of what your process is. After all, the beauty of being a 6-line profile is that you're given a very special role in this life. That is the role of the role model, to be truly an example for others. And to really grasp what that means, it's the difference between the 5th line and the 6th line. The 5th line is about telling people things. It's a line of universalization. It's a line that, tells people what the problem is. The sixth line isn't like that at all. And this is where we're really moving in our trajectory globally. That is, we're moving towards the role model, where rather than, being the heretic and hammering at people, that the role model simply lives their example. And it is that example that has its impact over others. It's your example that is there to have impact over others. And it is the example of a being who is living purely, existentially, in the now, relying on your splenic system. Relying on a capacity inherent in you that with depth and with skill, that you know how to navigate on this plane, moment by moment by moment. Trust your spleen. It is the most important thing for you in this life. Trust your spleen. All right.